Tom, welcome.
Thank you.
And welcome to viewers for tuning in. I'm here with Tom Evslin today. We're going to talk a little bit about the use of AI or artificial intelligence. Tom, tell me a little bit about you and what's your background?
My background is being a serial high-tech entrepreneur. I started programming in college, which was a long, long time ago, 65 years ago, and have started a number of businesses, almost always based on technology. I'm retired, but I've spent most of my life being a high-tech entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I was introduced to computers almost as soon as large computers that had tubes in those days were introduced when I was in college in 1963.
Yeah.
There were no courses in computers, but I had a job in the computer center. I was a history major, but I could earn money by programming. And started programming when I got out of college because that's what I knew how to do, and there were more jobs for programmers than for history majors. And I've been doing that ever since. Right? I've started a number of companies, usually based on technology of one kind or another, often in the communications area. The largest of them was a wholesale international telephone company called ITXC, which went public and developed technology to carry phone calls over the internet, not the kind that we would make today without thinking about it on Skype or Zoom, but the middle of a call. People were still calling on their telephone, and then we would carry the call from one country to another, or one continent to another, to somebody else on a telephone.
Yeah.
People who were calling didn't know they were using internet telephony, but the phone companies were buying the transport from us because it was cheaper than using the traditional telephony.
Do you feel like a wizard?
No. Oh. I admire wizards. I've met some, but no,
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah. What's been the driving motivation in your creation and discovery process?
It's hard to say. I think that if I have a talent, it's for spotting what may happen when something new, enabling comes along. I was working at AT&T. I was responsible for starting their first ISP, AT&T WorldNet service.
Internet service for those internet service providers. So the way that you get onto the world.
The way you get onto it. And that was in the very beginning. We popularized flat rate, all you could eat internet. Before that, it was always so much an hour. But people were afraid to use it because they're afraid they'd leave it on. So we said 1995, you can use as much of it as you want, and that was very popular. Well, while I was doing that, I started hearing about voice being carried over the internet. And I talked to the people at Bell Labs, which is the scientific part of, engineering part of AT&T. They said, no, it's impossible. And I asked them why, and they said, well, it takes too much computing power. And I thought about it, and realized that because due to Moore's law, computing power gets about 50% cheaper every year and a half. So more computing power isn't an obstacle for very long. I tried to interest AT&T in voice over the internet, and they were basically saying, are you crazy? This is our most profitable business. Why do we want to cut the costs? And they still had enough monopoly thinking left over, so they didn't realize if they didn't do it, somebody else would. Yeah. I thought, if they're not going to do it, I am. Yeah. So I raised some money and started the company. But it was, I had this, I could see forward to, as the computing and the communication became cheaper, that things that weren't possible before would become possible. And that one of those things would be voice over IP, and within that it changed the world in funny ways. So
this is, just to tell folks, this is like, instead of picking up the phone and the line is connecting you, this is using the internet.
You're using it, but the people didn't know they were using the internet.
Yeah.
They were still using their phones.
Yeah. So
we were selling to the phone companies because they buy international call completion at wholesale. Yeah. So we looked like just another phone company, except our price was so low.
Yeah.
So what that did, there used to be an international cartel actually managed by the UN called the ITU, International Telephony Union, that kept telephone rates high, international rates high all around the world. So when we started, it cost more than $1 a minute at wholesale to call from the United States to China, to India, to Africa. Within 3 years, that was down to about 5 cents.
Yeah.
Because that whole, it was not only the technology, but the cartel pricing that kept all those prices high.
And that changes the world.
It changed
Our
the
ability
world
to
for better
communicate,
and for worse.
Yeah.
It made it possible to have call centers in other countries that wouldn't have been possible if phone calls were that expensive. It made it possible for more globalization because communication was better, and that's been good and that's been bad. And I think, you know, leaping forward to artificial intelligence, technology by itself isn't good or bad, but it enables both.
Yeah.
And you, in a way, you can't stop some of the bad effects, but what you can do is work on the positive. You know, now we have this new capability. What can we do with it? What are the positive things that we can do with it?
Well, that's a whole semester ethics class about whether technology shapes us or we're shaping technology, the good or the bad.
Right.
Your driving force, you're still trying to. What is your driving force in the creation of this
Of Golden Dome VT?
Well, we'll get there in a minute, but
okay.
if you're like your curiosity.
I'm retired,
yeah.
so I have the liberty to do the things that I want to do. And you know, most of my life I've had to make businesses that could earn money so that could get investment and grow. I don't have to do that now. I've been fascinated ever since ChatGPT, the first 3.5 was introduced a couple of years ago now, by what AI can do. I didn't, like most people, I didn't realize that it was coming along so far. I knew there's been a lot of work in artificial intelligence, but the chat interface and the language abilities of large language models sort of blew me away.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about what can we do with this. And there's obviously a problem that misinformation can be generated even more quickly if you use AI.
Yeah.
But is there a way then that AI can be a force for good information? And in a world where we're drowned in information, and we really are, thanks to cheap communication, it's not enough just to have information available, but you have to be able to find the information that you're looking for.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to summarize it. And you know, when I went to school, you learned how to use the Reader's Guide to Periodic Literature and a card catalog in a library, and that's how you found information. But now, the information's at our fingertips, but way too much of it.
Yeah, and having to sort through.
Having to sort through, you need the tools. You know, Google a generation ago was a step in that direction.
Yeah.
We usually get to most of the information we want, get a bunch of information we don't want, but we do find things right away when we're looking for it.
We certainly have I can remember when I call it the picnic table analogy. You could put into Google, how do I make a picnic table? And you'd get all these cool, interesting people who'd put up blogs and plans for picnic tables. And now you get
10 ads for picnic
tables and plans
and not
for
only on
picnic
Google,
tables.
but on everything else you look at.
Which really has to do with what the underlying forces of society. It's not the technology itself that's doing that. It's that we're in a society where people, we're in a capitalist society where people need to sell you things to...
in order to fund what their business is.
Yeah. AI is an interesting word, artificial intelligence. It's neither intelligent or unintelligent, right?
Right, exactly.
It's been described to me as machine learning.
Yep.
Can you just talk a little bit about that? What's your understanding?
Well, machine learning's a component of it, but let me break it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Like many things that happen in technology, there were a convergence of unrelated things that made what we call AI today possible. One, interestingly, very mundane, was spelling checking. So we've been used to having spelling checkers almost since we could draft on personal computers. The people who developed the spelling checkers in an effort to make their work better and better did a lot of work on what's called fuzzy logic. You put in some letters that misspell something or sound like it, and it's not straightforward to figure out what you really meant. And a spelling checker doesn't know what you mean, but it does know what's statistically probable, because now there's so much data from generations and generations of spelling checkers. So a few years ago, you noticed that spelling checkers not only gave you suggestions for the word that you were putting in, but also for the next couple words.
Yep.
And that was partly so that you could key faster on the cell phone, right?
Yep.
That it would guess the next couple words. And sometimes it was right and sometimes it was wrong, but we always sort of understood it was just making a guess.
Yeah.
It wasn't making an assertion. So there is a large body of learning on what people mean and what's liable to be the next word.
Yep.
And so remember that concept of what's liable to be the next word.
Yep.
And then I talked about computing getting cheaper and cheaper. Very powerful computer chips were developed called GPUs as opposed to CPUs that we normally use. And that G stands for graphic, and they were first developed for computer graphics.
Yeah.
To make computer graphics be snappy, you need a lot of computing. Then they got developed even further because of cryptocurrency. It turned out that creating bitcoins and the crypto mining, it needs very powerful computers. So a market developed for what had just been used for graphics for the same chips in order to create Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And the company called NVIDIA, which is very famous now, was the major supplier of these very fast CPUs, and their customers, what funded their advance, were the Bitcoin miners. And also big computing centers were being built to do Bitcoin mining, so there were the computer centers. So there was a combination of many things, but the two most important were the machine learning that had gone into fuzzy logic and spell checkers and their extensions, and these very powerful computing engines, the GPUs that had developed for graphics and then for Bitcoin. And when those came together, all of a sudden, with a lot of ingenuity, you could build what are called the large language models that seem to speak to us in a sense because they're guessing the next word.
Yeah.
So you notice if you say to ChatGPT, tell me what influences our weather or something like that, it'll start out by saying our weather is influenced by. And then what's happening is it's guessing the next word.
Based on information that it has.
Based on a huge amount of training data. So,
and I just want to back up for folks. So ChatGPT is a particular AI, and GPT stands for generative. Go ahead and tell us. Yeah.
Generative pre-programmed transformer.
Yeah.
And the GPT part, and you're correct, of course, it's not only part of ChatGPT, but part of most of the AI models, all of the AI models that we talk to.
Yeah.
It's the one that appears to understand language and appears to speak. What it doesn't have is any concept of truth. Because you wouldn't, if your spelling checker jumps ahead a couple words and gives you the wrong phrase, not what you were thinking of. You don't think that it hallucinated, you just think that it was wrong.
Yeah.
And like the spelling checker, but writ large, the large language models are just guessing at something plausible.
Yeah. The example that I've seen recently, and I think, and maybe you can corroborate, is if you ask one of the GPT's image production to generate an image of an analog watch.
Yeah.
It'll generate 10 past 10 because every
watch ad is at 10 past 10.
Yeah, and so even if you say generate me an analog watch at, and I tried it out with one of these, generate me an analog watch at 2:15 or at 6, it'll come back.
It'll still come back at 10.
At 10 of 10 because all of its training on analog watches has been
Right. Has been
Yeah.
seeing those. So
Yeah.
it answers with a plausible answer,
Yeah.
not necessarily a true answer. And if we mistake that for truth, then the effect is as if it was hallucinating, and that's what people call it when you get these incorrect answers. The interesting thing, though, to me, is you can use AI to weed out its own hallucinations. And my first attempts to do that, to say, how do you know that?
Yeah.
And that wasn't very helpful because it doesn't know how it knows, really. It was trained.
Let's just, for a second, Kevin, let's go to ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And we'll just show folks. So this ChatGPT is a product of Google, if I'm
No, of a company called OpenAI.
OpenAI.
Google has a competitive product.
That's right. But you can sign in using your Google account. That's what
Yeah.
I've done here. And so, I can ask it like, who is Tom Evslin? And we won't even give it any more information than that and see what it says. Oh, look at retired American businessman, author, former public official, right?
Yeah.
And it tells us a little bit
It
of
tells
this.
about ITXC that I was talking about.
So it gives us a little information that goes on. And then I might say, if I was having a conversation with Tom.
Notice, by the way, it gave you its sources, which is a new improvement.
Oh, that's true. It's Wikipedia. What would you recommend I ask? Which I did not do, by the way, but tap into his expertise in technology, entrepreneurship, public service, and Vermont policy. So here's a great list of questions that one could ask you. So
I don't think I've ever been interviewed by ChatGPT before.
yeah. So what's interesting to me, you took this ChatGPT, the OpenAI resources, and it's OpenAI because tell me why it's called OpenAI.
Well, it may be somewhat of a misnomer, actually. The company OpenAI was founded by Elon Musk and Sam Altman. Then they had a falling out, and it was originally meant, in Vermont we call it a public benefit corporation, but it wasn't meant to make a lot of money for investors. It didn't have the normal capital structure of a Silicon Valley startup. And it was governed by the kind of board of directors that a nonprofit would have rather than directors elected by the shareholders. When they needed enormous amounts of money to do all this training and buy the GPUs, in order to get people to put money in, there had to be somewhere they could get a return. And so they started a for-profit subsidiary that was partly owned by Microsoft, which is what funded and came out with ChatGPT. And lately, they've decided to change the whole company to a more traditional company, at least what they say is to have more access to capital.
Yeah.
And Elon Musk has been very against that, although he runs many for-profit companies of his own.
Yeah.
But it was called OpenAI because it was going to be all about the benefits of AI and making them very open. Ironically,
But also
their
allowing
code,
other people to be part of that
yes.
programming and develop their own GPTs.
right, but they didn't really ever do that.
Okay.
So OpenAI's code is not open.
Okay.
And their training data, which is called the weights technically,
Yeah.
is also not open.
Yeah.
Facebook, who was running number 3, decided to go open, but hasn't gotten a lot of traction. And now lately, we have DeepMind from China, which is open code.
Yeah.
Perhaps dangerous because it comes from China, but it is open. And open code means a very specific thing. That for years I've been part of the sort of the open code, open source community.
Yeah.
And so we write code and we post it publicly for other people to use. And there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, people have different motives for contributing to it, but the benefits are that if you're going to use other people's code, for safety's sake, you want to be able to look at it and know what it is that you're using. And also, if you post your code, as I do with much of mine, then other people make improvements to it. So you, just as you were saying, so if you're open, development around an open standard can be very, very fast if people get interested in it.
So you created as part of, and this is there's a little bit of an opaque jump between ChatGPT, and maybe you can spend a little bit of time explaining this collaborative meeting reporter. And if we go to your website here, Fractals of Change, you do have links to your GitHubs with all of the code that went into creating both Golden Dome and the chat meeting.
The Golden Dome's not there yet, just because I got to get the bugs out before I post it.
Okay. So let's just tell me a little bit. You created this collaborative meeting reporter GPT, and tell me about this. What is this?
Okay, it's something. It's a strange beast called a custom GPT. This is a capability that OpenAI created on top of ChatGPT. So basically, it's a pre-packaged sort of entryway. I didn't do programming to write this. I wrote instructions in English, and I told Collaborative Meeting Reporter what I wanted it to do when it got a question from a human. And then I made it available, which you can do through ChatGPT. You can make it available free to anyone who has a ChatGPT account, even a free ChatGPT account.
While you're talking, I'm going to go ahead and just copy the transcript of this recent Burlington Ordinance Committee.
Good.
And we're going to put it in here.
So the idea, what gave me the idea, I've been on the board of both Vermont Journalism Trust, which is Vermont Digger, and Vermont Public. And I know that as a country, as a world, we're suffering from a lack of reporters. We have more, ironically, we have more information than ever before, but less people to help us make sense or to seek through all of that information. I didn't think it makes sense to just have AI is not a good replacement for human reporters, partly because it's going to give you whatever is plausible rather than what's true. But my question was, can AI be an aid to reporters so that reporters can do more with less, perhaps improve the economics of public service reporting, reporting in general, but also just free reporters to do more of what humans do. So one use of AI...
And access more primary source material.
Absolutely. And do, my friend Dan Galloway, who founded Vermont Digger, said what reporters are really best at is asking people questions. And so as you're doing, you want to free up reporters so they can go out and ask questions, not take notes and make transcriptions, perhaps not even do drafts, but you want to free them up so that they can do what humans do very well. So I thought of, and there's a technique in using artificial intelligence called human in the loop, where you treat the artificial intelligence that you're working with as if it were an assistant. So you give it instructions, but just as you would with any assistant, you don't expect them to be followed 100%. You know that you, not the assistant, is responsible for the quality of the output. So you look at it and you say, well, that's 90% of the way there, but this and this and this has to be changed. Let me see another draft. Or you draft a paragraph yourself and stick it in as an editor might do. And eventually you get a better product. then you could have a loan because it saved a lot of time and maybe let you make a few phone calls or do something to verify the information. So that's what gave me the idea for Collaborative Meeting Reporter, just sort of as a demonstration.
And when you do this, what I found, or what it seemed when you, and this may be part of your programming, is I just put the transcript for this meeting. It was an ordinance committee meeting on cat licensing. And it gives me a meeting overview. And I'm assuming that you've trained this to weight this based on something in the meeting. You're asking it how many times was this thing spoken about, how many times?
Right, and I played around with those instructions, just like you might play around with an instruction manual. So, I said disregard things like a motion to adjourn and purely procedural stuff. If it's ceremonial, then it's probably not the headline. And what you might tell a reporter, think about the so what. Why is it important? Who's it important to? Look at how much contention there was, because that tells you something about. So I gave it a bunch of factors, just as you guessed, to weight.
And it did. I found that it did a pretty good. It gives us a meeting overview summary. The ordinance committee held a public forum to discuss a proposal stemming from the Dog Task Force report. And it was focused on licensing requirements for cats and whether to prohibit free-roaming cats within the city. Very simple, it's a simple meeting. And then it goes through the topic-by-topic summary. And then the one thing that I did when I did this, and then it gets into top 3 newsworthy topics.
Yeah, and I told it to do that and come back to...
Which is an interesting thing that it forces the person reading this to say, here are the things that were discussed in this meeting. Here's some suggestions of newsworthy topics. And then what I did is I went back in and you say, here's the proposed ranking of the top 3 topics. Do you agree, or would you like to make any changes? Which is really interesting. You're sort of forcing the user of this
to be involved
and be involved with the content, which is different than just saying, give me a summary and let it be done.
Right, because I think that's a bad idea and perhaps even dangerous.
Yeah. So one of the things that I did when I did this as an experiment was I just asked it to rank emotional arguments next to factual arguments. And I was curious how it would do that. And it's always curious to me whether we speak politely to these learning models or whether you just, tell it what you want.
I speak politely, but I sometimes ask myself why.
Yeah. So then it does come back and gives a revised ranking, distinguishing emotional and factual arguments, which is an interesting thing to ask.
It's an interesting question you asked,
AI also,
how does it know? Since it has no emotions.
How does it know the difference between emotional and factual arguments? But, just for fun, I actually took this summary and I put it into Sora, which is, no, it wasn't. It was a video creation. A video creation, and I said, create a 30-second video that summarizes this meeting, and it did. Although I'll tell you, and this is the part, I feel guilty because I feel like I'm using immense amounts of electricity and water. And tell me a little bit about the potential for the downside of this beyond just our, relying on this to do a job for us, putting potentially people out of work. If an editor says, I don't have to hire a reporter, I can get ChatGPT to do this, little papers I'm thinking of. What are the drawbacks that we need to be aware of?
There's a number of drawbacks. It does, right now, AI consumes an enormous amount of electricity for what it does. Interestingly, the new Chinese model uses much less in the way it does its computing, and doesn't need as many expensive GPUs, or appears not to. So that cost may come down faster than people think it will. And if it does, that'll be very interesting because it means that there are many more applications for AI. If it weren't so power hungry, more of it could be on your phone, for example. We're liable to find it built into almost everything, like we do with speech or LEDs, or, think how much less electricity an LED uses than a light bulb, and that meant that you could have light everywhere because it uses so little power. So I think today AI does consume an enormous amount of electrical resource, and often water if you need it for cooling or for generating the electricity. That may come down. Putting people out of work, I think if it's used well, it'll create more jobs than it disappears. But that's a little bit like the argument for globalization. And I think we have to be very careful to realize that you can sit back as an economist and say, well, 50 jobs were created and only 25 were destroyed. Look at that, we got 25 jobs. Yeah, but there still may be 25 people who are out of work. Yeah. Those jobs may not have gone to the people who lost their jobs. So I think we've learned from globalization that you have to be sensitive specifically to the people who are losing jobs. And I hope that's a lesson that we learned with AI. Now, I think we can also enhance a lot of jobs. I know when I talk to plumbers and carpenters, they're pretty early users of AI because it helps them. They use it to help them with a lot of administrative stuff.
Sure.
Or a lot of calculations. So now you get this person who's got a one-person, two-person business, and all of a sudden they can grow without hiring help that they can't get and probably couldn't afford, but they can do more work, and their work is more valuable. I think that AI is going to help non-physicians do many things that physicians do. They already do lots of those things, but you went to medical school for 8 years and got crammed full of facts. That's not really very helpful. Being able to find the most current facts is helpful now. It was very important when the only thing a physician had to work with was the physician's desktop reference, but not helpful now. So people who are giving hands-on care also have access to lots of deep information and will be able to do their jobs better, which means they'll command better salaries because they'll be more valuable. And hopefully we'll get more of them and we'll get more medical care. So that it can be a good thing, but... and I think, again, it's not a matter of arguing about whether the technology is good or bad, or are the societal values that are underpinning it. Right. Are we, do we care about which jobs are going to get lost? And do we care about the people particularly? I mean, it's the people, not the jobs that count. And we have to keep remembering that.
Thank you. Let's jump really quickly to the smart transcripts, the Golden Dome VT, about Golden Dome VT. And I'm going to just click on Do Not Show Me This Again. This is a, again, actually, I don't want to skip over this too quickly because I do think that this disclaimer, so to speak, is pretty important. Just talk a little bit about why you put this disclaimer here.
I want people to understand what the technology can do and what it can't. And I don't want them to rely on it for things that it can't do very well. So, for example, these transcripts are only slightly better than closed captioning. They're not biased. They're just what it thinks that it heard. But that's where I came up with the idea of smart transcripts. So actually, you were asking how one idea leads to another, and when I was working on Meeting Reporter, I thought of the human in the loop. How do they verify that that's actually what was said at the meeting without having to go through the whole transcript, the whole video of the meeting? And so then I realized that I could link from a transcript to the video. So I make a transcript, like these transcripts that are here on Golden Dome VT. They're not perfect, and I'm the first to say that they're not perfect. But if you highlight any portion, maybe if you go to a transcript, we can show people.
We're going to go to the
just click on it.
February 6 GovOps, Government Operations.
Okay. And now if you highlight any of the text over there.
I'll just come down here. Thank you for the
To
opportunity
say,
to
you know, gee, I
testify.
wonder if they really said that or how intense they were. And then you say, play clip.
Thank you again for the opportunity
You
to
get the
testify
actual
before your
clip
committee.
from the meeting and can verify. So, like Ronald Reagan once said, trust but verify. But I realized that given that people are going to look at these not on paper but on computers most of the time, my preparing a transcript that looked like a piece of paper didn't make sense. If I could tie it to the video, and this is, I didn't copy the video, this is the actual video on YouTube, the way the state posted it. That when it's important to verify something, you can do it, but you have the advantages of text that you can search it, you
And what's
can scan
interesting
it.
here is that, you know, as I understand it, the Vermont legislature doesn't keep minutes
Right.
of their meetings.
Right.
And so you're basically, you've started a minute keeping record.
And you could feed this into any one of a number of things and get a summary from it.
Yeah.
But you still have the smart transcript to go back and verify.
And I could, I guess I can't.
If you want the whole thing, if you go up to the file, you can't edit it, but you can save it as text from the file menu.
So there we go, save text, and then I could
Then you'll have a
open
text file on your computer that you can do anything you want with.
and then I could then go and read that into,
You could read that into Meeting Reporter if you wanted to.
okay, I'm just gonna copy that over and feed it right into the meeting reporter over here, and I don't think I have to start a new one. We'll see if I
Yeah,
have to,
probably.
if I can just feed that in. And to be fair,
There you go.
oh, it's interesting that it took, because this, I don't have a paid account, and it didn't think that was too much. Sometimes you'll run into the
Sometimes
issue
it
of
tells you
having
you're
to-
using it too much, yeah.
You'll have to do, feed the transcript in multiple parts. So, so this would be a way of understanding that primary source material and what was spoken. And are there plans to take this, to expand on this, to begin to be able to follow a story? I mean, I think that's one of the things for me, that to be able to follow a piece of legislation.
From one, yeah, I've been thinking about how, now that we have, I'm building up this database of textual information.
Yeah.
So how can we use that? And I haven't had time to work on that. My hope is, there are two things. By making this public, I start to get feedback on what people want.
Yeah.
Because I've learned, you know, I've been a software developer all my life. The features I think people are going to want aren't the ones they end up wanting.
Yep.
So I've learned get something out fast and then get feedback from your users to figure out where to go next. So you're giving me feedback, and people thought searchability is something that people wanted. So I put a Google search in, which isn't perfect, but it's a start.
Yep.
And I could link it more formally to Meeting Reporter, have a way for the video clips to get into the reporting, as you say, write something that does some analysis or some comparison. My hope is that most of the expansion of this will come from other people, and that's the whole idea of open source. So once I post the code, which I will in the next couple of weeks, then I'm hoping that other people who are interested will add cool stuff to it. It's just me working by myself, so there's a limit to what I can do. But even there, AI is interesting. I could never have created this site without AI. Most of the programming was done by AI.
Interesting. Is that a particular GPT that you used?
I used ChatGPT to do most of it. And not, you know, I haven't made an exhaustive study, so I wouldn't begin to claim it's the best assistant for coding.
Yeah.
It's just that I'm familiar with it, so I use it. But it's been like having a team of 4 people. And not only a team of 4 who are not perfect, but not only a team of 4 people, but with diverse skills.
What people are perfect?
Yeah, no people are perfect. So I don't expect this assistant to be perfect, and it isn't either.
Yeah.
It creates bugs, it misunderstands what I say, or I don't communicate very well what I want, which can happen with a human, and I have to go back and tell it, no, that's what I said, but that's not what I meant.
So these 2 projects that are part of your kind of this point in your life, this goldendomevt.com, and then the collaborative meeting reporter that you can put together. Both of those can be found on your Fractals of Change website.
That's one way to get to them, but you can get directly to www.goldendomevt.com.
Yep.
Is the simplest way to get to that.
But
And-
this also links to your GitHub where
Yeah.
this code can be found.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
other
not
code
yet
that
the
you've worked
code
on.
for Golden
Not
Dome
Golden-
VT.
Yep, yep. You know, for folks that are looking at this and feel, you know, frightened, frustrated, annoyed by, I mean, there's a whole kind of like, you know, like understandable reluctance to engage with AI. Maybe not practical, but understandable reluctance to engage with AI. How do you speak to them? What do you say?
It's worth learning how to engage with AI because it can be helpful or it can be not helpful. Most people don't resent spelling checkers.
Yeah.
You know, you think of this as, well, this is a spelling checker with suggestions writ large. Once you understand what it's good at and what it's bad at and how to question it, you know, for example, if I wrote another GPT called Citation Checker, but you know, if you tell ChatGPT to write an article on something and give you citations, it's liable to make up the citations. And then you'd be very embarrassed. Some lawyer presented a court case where the citations were made up. The judge's clerk found out. It's not that the lawyer knew that, but it was certainly his responsibility.
Yeah.
But if you use Citation Checker, which is also powered by ChatGPT, it'll go out very diligently and check all the citations and say, well, this one exists and this one doesn't exist, and this one doesn't say what it's purported to say.
Yeah.
So if you learn, the more you learn about AI, the more you can make sure that it's doing what you want it to do. It's not the master, it's an assistant.
And who's doing well? I mean, are there resources? I'm thinking about, you know, students in school who need to be accessing an understanding of this. Media literacy, you know, here we are in a community media center. We work with young people, interns. We're doing media literacy and media education. This is something that I think we need to have folks understand how to use.
I think
who's doing it well?
Khan Academy is doing a very good job both using AI as a tool for instructing in other things and also in the various techniques of AI. I would say they're probably the best. My 14-year-old granddaughter is frustrated because in school they say you can't use AI, that's cheating. And first of all, she knows everybody else is cheating anyway, and she's not a cheater by herself, but she also says, I can use it constructively.
Yeah.
And when she doesn't understand something in math, for example, she goes to Khan Academy and supplements what she's been taught in school and learns it better. So I think they're doing a very good job, and I think it's critical that everybody involved in education writ large, so it would include youth and not just schools, be educating in ChatGPT. It's the tool that we use, and we have to learn how to use it well.
Yeah, and this is not augmenting our reality. It's a tool created by humans.
It's a tool created by humans, and you know, when I took physics a long time ago, the first week was on how to use a slide rule, because you couldn't do physics without being able to use a slide rule.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, when calculators were first introduced, some teachers of physics wanted to ban them because they were afraid people wouldn't learn how to use slide rules anymore.
Yeah.
And they were right. People don't know how to use slide rules anymore. And guess what? They can do their physics better because they have a calculator.
Yeah, and most people aren't even, they don't need to get a calculator anymore. If they
No,
have
not anymore. And so I think educators sometimes lose track of the goal.
Yeah.
And the goal is of writing, for example, is to be able to research and communicate clearly. And whatever tools can help you do that, whether it's a spelling checker or an LLM, that's to the good, not to the bad. Because if more people can communicate clearly, the world will be a better place, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to end, making the world a better place. Tom Evslin, thanks for joining us. Thank you all for watching us today. Hope this conversation has been interesting and informative to you. If you want to learn more about Tom, you can go to his website at tomevslin.com. That's where his blog is, and check out his goldendomevt.com transcripts of Vermont state government. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. Is there any last words that you want to share before we close up?
Just about Golden Dome VT,
Yeah.
that people may not, this is a very critical session of the Vermont legislature. There are a lot of problems, both locally caused and nationally caused, that our legislature has to deal with, and hopefully will deal with it well. Most of what happens in the legislature happens in committees. And my hope is that by giving people easy access to the transcripts, what I call smart transcripts at the committee meetings, people who are concerned about what's happening in the legislature can see the legislation as it hatches at the committee level. By the time it gets a lot of public attention and it's on the floor, most possibilities have been precluded. But when something's in committee, and I'd urge people to look at the bills they care about in committee, you can understand what's happening, and you can have an effect. You can do it from here. You can click there and write to the members of the committee and tell them whether you think they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing.
Interesting, yep.
So I'm hoping this will be a tool so that we can help our legislature have an extremely productive session when that's what we need.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have you back at some point to talk more about where this next iteration has gone.
Good. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
All right. Thanks for watching.